I mean, Theresa May has said, as you know, resolving the rights of EU citizens in the UK is her top priority in negotiations. She wants to deal with it first. That's hardly poisoning the well, is it?
But the issue of EU citizens is something that she could resolve now. I mean, I was in the University of St Andrews yesterday with the First Minister, and there, it's one of many institutions and workplaces that EU citizens make a huge contribution financially and making our towns and cities and communities a better place in which to live and work. The UK government could have solved this problem a long time ago.
As could the EU,
and they
of course.
should do so now. Well, it's something that's up to the UK government. They can say, look, if you live here, you're an EU citizen, you live here, you've made your home here, then stay. They can do that. And in terms of poisoning the well, we're seeing Theresa May. Remember, after this election, after all this has been and gone, there's a big job for parliamentarians in the next parliament, which is to scrutinise the work of the government over what kind of relationship we have with Europe. That'll impact on the environment, on EU citizens. And we've got Theresa May chasing after, trying to criticise and trying to hurl abuse at our European partners, which is going to have to negotiate with on our behalf.
But this is a negotiation, as you have just said, Stephen Gethins.
Sure.
And what can be utterly contemptible about first offering to deal with this issue up front before the formal negotiations started? Well, that was rejected by the EU for whatever reason. So the government did make an attempt to deal with resolving the issue of the fate of EU citizens. And secondly, they do have to look at British citizens in EU countries. It is a two-way street.
But look, this is something. But look, if you take the issue of EU citizens who live here, who we should be honoured have made Scotland and elsewhere in the UK their home. Now, if you look at the massive financial contribution alone, and it's much more than that, but if you look at the finances, we'd be financially worse off without all these EU citizens.
But Theresa May hasn't said she doesn't want these EU citizens to stay here, but you're implying that she wants them to go.
It is good for the UK to keep EU citizens here. They contribute so much in the universities round about where I live, near St Andrews, Dundee, Abertay, in our tourist sector, in our food and drink sector. They make a huge contribution. The UK government can sort this out now. And actually, given the way Theresa May, and for that matter, Ruth Davidson, have been sitting there and the sort of abuse they've hurled at the people that we need to negotiate with in a few weeks' time, actually, this could be a little bit of goodwill.
All right.
So they could have solved this problem actually months ago, and yet they've let this uncertainty go on for almost a year now. That's unacceptable.
Right. And I'm sure that is very unsettling for the EU citizens who are living here. But what about the 1.1 million British expats in the EU? Are you not then leaving them, to some extent, out in the cold?
Well, look, this is why the most substantial piece of work that's been done in terms of our future relationship with Europe was the one that was done by the Scottish Government just before Christmas time, whereby it looked at us as a compromise, looking at us staying in the single market and having freedom of movement.
Sure, and I saw that document, but I just want to concentrate on the EU citizens and a reciprocal deal for the 1.1 British expats in the EU. You did ask about
the UK citizens as well. You did ask about that issue as well, and that would have solved that particular problem. Now, look, we're not alone in thinking that freedom of movement is good because it benefits UK citizens living elsewhere in Europe as well as EU citizens here. In fact, it benefits us all.
Yes.
So that compromise document would have solved that problem.
But that
the UK
compromise document hasn't been used. And if we're looking now at your proposal to give a unilateral, let me just ask the question, to give a unilateral offer to the EU by saying we will guarantee the rights of residency and the right to work of all the EU citizens that are here, what happens to the 1.1 million British expats? Are you prepared for them to have a less good deal if that's what came back from the EU?
No, we're not saying that in the slightest, and that's why we put forward the compromise document that would have secured their rights as well. In fact, the SNP is the only political party who have put together a document that would secure the rights of EU citizens as well as those of UK citizens as well. We've had nothing from the UK government. And actually, that's been an interesting point for this election campaign, whereas you've seen a lot of detail from the Scottish Government and the SNP. We've had bluff and bluster from the Tories in terms of their dealing with Europe. We had an EU referendum campaign to try and solve a Tory civil war. And now we're having a general election campaign to stave off yet another Tory civil war and take full advantage of a Labour Party civil war. We should be getting to grips with these substantial problems that we've got as a result of having to deal with a relationship with Europe. And Theresa May's language and using people as bargaining chips is making that situation worse.
All right, let's move on to domestic policies. Nicola Sturgeon has previously ruled out increasing the top rate of tax, with the civil service analysis to the Scottish Government suggesting a risk of £30 million in lost revenues if the wealthy, I suppose, simply up and leave. So why do you want to increase the top rate of tax from 45 pence to 50 pence now? What's changed?
Well, nothing's changed. This is the same situation as has been in the past two SNP manifestos, and unlike the Tories,
you wanted a national 50 pence. Let's be clear with the viewers.
Answer the question. Well, why don't you let the past two manifestos? Now, I think you're picking up on the finance minister's remarks that were reported in some newspapers today, and what we've been clear about is that we don't want to see Scotland doing that on its own while we're still part of the Union and we don't have that many financial powers, but we'd like to see it across the United Kingdom. Because here's the thing, we're in a Westminster election and we've been clear that where we can, we will work with other political parties for progressive politics, just as we did in the last Parliament as well. And this is one area where obviously we could work with other parties in the UK Parliament.
Do you have the powers? Does the Scottish Government have the powers to raise income tax?
Well, if it does so, if you're doing so just in Scotland and not elsewhere.
But you do have the powers. You just said in your last answer that you have.
Now that is why, Joe. That's why the Council of Economic Advisers. And remember, the First Minister took that innovative step of having a Council of Economic Advisers. Is somebody that she refers to on this very subject.
Stephen.
But on the point of Westminster and on the point of these elections, it is something that we can go and we can work with other parties on issues on a pan-UK level while we're part of the United Kingdom. Big decisions are made about people in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK, and we have a responsibility to work in a constructive manner at Westminster. Right.
I mean, if you're going to continue talking at such great length, we can't put the questions to you. Now, in terms of the tax rate, you seem to imply that the Scottish Government doesn't have very much in the way of power. Of course, you do have powers to raise income tax yourselves, and you could have done so on numerous... You said you had very few powers, I think were the words you used. But it was such a long time ago now, I can't remember because you kept on chatting. In terms of raising the levels of income tax, you can do that. You can do that yourselves if you think it's important enough to raise the revenue. But what I'm trying to get to is why is now different to the other two manifestos where you only talked about it being done across the UK?
Well, look, we're going into a Westminster general election whereby decisions will be made on a pan-UK basis. Now, we want to see a reduction in austerity because if you look at £3 billion worth of cuts that are coming the way of the Scottish Government are coming from Westminster. And if we get those cuts, if we have that austerity, that's less money to spend on education, it's less money to spend on health, it's less money to spend on crucial public services. In Scotland. So Westminster has a huge role. It's important we have a strong team of SNP MPs at Westminster to make that case, and that's why we've been described as the effective opposition to the Tories at Westminster.
Is this election for you about the second independence referendum or not?
Well, independence is something that we're in favour of. You know, like the European result has showed that that's something we're in favour of.
So why is it not on your SNP campaign leaflets?
The Scottish Parliament has, well, we're just at the start of the campaign. I mean, I was with my campaign team. We've got a number of other campaign leaflets to be putting out. But look, we're still in favour. But
you've always known what your line is on independence.
But yeah, we do. And I don't think it's a great secret what our line is on independence.
Right, so why is it not on your campaign leaflets?
The Scottish Parliament has voted in favour of independence. What we want to see is Westminster respecting decisions that are made in the Scottish Parliament.
Because you don't think you're going to get as big a mandate this time round?
That we want to see. Well, let's see. I mean, the Tories have got us into this mess on just 36% of the vote, and the SNP has 95% of the seats in Scotland. So if those are the two different margins that you're comparing this by, I'm not sure that's terribly fair. But we're in this mess based on just 36% of people in the UK voting Conservative. Now, I'm fighting hard against the Tories where I am in North East Fife, but we're up for this fight. We know that we've got to work hard over the next few weeks.
Stephen Gethins, thank you.
Thank you.